emergency in Eastern Africa. How best to tackle drought, hunger and war. In the interview, German Development Minister Dirk Niebel.
Mr. Niebel, East Africa is experiencing catastrophic drought this year. You were there. What impressions did you return with?
As regards hunger, I saw devastating scenes. People there live in terrible conditions. But hunger and drought aren't the only problems in Eastern Africa. Fighting is driving streams of refugees from Somalia, making the situation far worse. So all of Somalia's neighbors are especially badly affected. But worst of all is Somalia itself, of course. The conditions on the ground make working there difficult.
Germans have already donated around 100 million euros. Your ministry is giving much more than that. Islamic states have pledged 500 million. So there's money coming in. But is there enough to combat famine, at least in the short term?
I'm proud that Germans have donated so much. The German government is also giving funds, not just to combat the current hunger crisis. The next droughts are already on the way. We do need to provide short-term aid to stop people from dying. But medium to long term, we need to help these countries change so the next drought doesn't hit people as hard as this one. So we've chosen a structured, phased approach that should mean we can help rural structures in the midterm so they can deal with the next drought themselves.
Die es möglich machen, alleine vorzugsweise mit der nächsten Dürre fertig zu werden. Und nein, das Geld reicht.
And no, there probably isn't enough money yet. We have to look for ways of optimizing the effect of what's there. We can only take limited action in Somalia. Through the World Food Program in Mogadishu, in the south, through the Red Cross and Red Crescent. Local NGOs run a few projects for Germany's GIZ agency. In northern Somalia, the Welthungerhilfe and German church aid organizations are active. But all in their own area, not coordinated across the board. That's easier in neighboring countries. But you still have to see the size of the catastrophe. Kenya alone has taken in 760,000 refugees. Imagine that and tell me which country in Central Europe could and would do it. It's an enormous contribution.
Kenya's experienced this for many years. Countries battling refugee disasters often have difficulty accepting outside help. What's cooperation with Kenya like?
It's going very well. I'm very grateful that the Kenyan government has enabled access to all Dadaab camps so we can better care for the refugees. Unofficial camps surrounding the main one are at risk of being flooded if it does rain, because the soil cannot absorb the water. So we can now ensure greater safety for the refugees. Kenya is still concerned that refugees will stay in the region, which is already poor and arid. The camp's been there for 20 years, so that concern is not entirely without foundation. And where exactly are the Somalian refugees supposed to return to? The second fear is that al-Shabaab terrorists could enter Kenya with the refugees and use it as a haven or recruiting ground. They're understandable concerns, so we need to cooperate with Kenya to make sure we can implement the measures we're working towards with the government's full support.
Auch immer wieder dafür werben, dass wir die Maßnahmen durchführen können, die wir durchführen, dann aber mit der vollen Unterstützung der Regierung.
You've made very clear the difficulties of getting aid to Somalia. Do you ever despair that food aid isn't reaching the places where there's hunger, though help would be possible simply because the government doesn't exist, and all that remains are militias and tribal warriors, and maybe terrorists?
Yes, you wonder where their humanity has gone. Their own people are starving, and they're starving because of a supposed belief. It's something that's difficult to reconcile.
One idea that was floated sounded more like a cry of desperation. It goes, we should use the militias to bring in food aid, even though we know that they'll help themselves first. Is that an acceptable proposal?
No, I don't think that's acceptable. We need to start a political process, because the military solution in Somalia hasn't worked for 20 years. That's why we're acting to strengthen IGAD's local and regional structures. Few people know the organization. It's the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, made up of the national leaders of the countries involved. It's the political arm that might be able to find dialogue partners within al-Shabaab. In Afghanistan, not all Taliban are the same, and it'll be much the same in Somalia. The problem is there's not so much the lack of governance, it's more the clear structures which existed, many of them much longer than the state itself, which are at odds with one another. That makes it difficult to support that. Instead of giving starving civilians the supplies they need, letting these structures expand. I think that's the wrong approach. They're already well funded with ransom money.
There was a failed international intervention in the mid-90s. A few years ago, Ethiopia moved in to provide some sort of basic structures there. Is a military intervention conceivable, even as a last resort?
As long as we still have civilian options available, there's no military option. We've seen different initiatives over the past 20 years. The Bundeswehr was also active in Somalia, and there was no military solution. So there can only be a political solution.
These droughts aren't the first of their kind in this part of the world. What needs doing in East Africa in the mid and long term to stop them having such catastrophic and lasting consequences?
We can't prevent drought. We can only improve our response. 75% of Kenya's population lives in rural areas, where the poor also live, and agriculture is still the most important sector. In Kenya, there are regions in the south where plenty can be produced, but they lack the logistics to get foodstuffs to regions that need them, due to a lack of infrastructure, and also because of corruption. That's why rural development requires a variety of measures. Take collecting water, which is taken for granted in Germany if you have a garden shed. Some guttering and a water butt can provide water during periods of drought lasting for months. When irrigating fields, resources have to be used sparingly. That means drip irrigation, where the roots of the plant receive water, not just tipping water over the field. We need better produce handling. Post-harvest losses of 40% are due to incorrect storage and faulty infrastructure. One solution is to bring produce from the field to the nearest market. In other words, improving infrastructure and education can help people cope with catastrophes like this, but it won't prevent them completely.
Besides the desire to help, many people feel a deep sense of helplessness when they see images from East Africa, especially Somalia. Do you feel that too?
Yes, coupled with anger that people there are making things even more difficult. The hunger crisis on its own would have been enough without the fighting and certainly without the persecution of refugees. Some were even killed as they tried to flee, in some cases in the most brutal fashion.
Mr. Niebel, thanks for talking to us.